We're more than a building. We're about freedom, and there's a spirit associated with freedom. And what we wanted to do is take that spirit outside of the building and take it out into the community and across the country.
It's a jewel on the banks of the Ohio River, the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, chronicling the past while confronting the sins of the present.
The worst part is the realization that we are still doing this. Racial injustice is still a reality, and so is slavery.
A new call to action for you to be a freedom conductor.
From WLWT, this is Let's Talk Cincy, presented by Western and Southern Financial Group. Put our financial strength behind you.
On a clear night, the North Star provides a beacon of light in the sky. But more than a century ago, it was also a beacon guiding enslaved people to freedom. Hello, everyone. I'm Curtis Fuller, and welcome to Let's Talk Cincy. That passage to freedom included the Underground Railroad, a network of people offering shelter to slaves traveling north from the South. Greater Cincinnati, being on the banks of the Ohio River, is steeped in Underground Railroad history. We're also home to the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. The center held a special ceremony recognizing today's conductors for freedom. We'll introduce you to the honorees a bit later. But first, after 8 years of planning, groundbreaking for the Freedom Center took place back in 2002. The doors opened 2 years later. The original mission was to reveal the stories of freedom's heroes. But as Lacey Roberts tells us, that perspective has evolved.
At the heart of it was being able to tell the story of the Underground Railroad, which for me became apocryphal. For people who were different helping one another, in this case at the risk of their lives in defiance of law, some readings of religion. And I felt that part of history, which had not been well told, could serve as an example, a source of inspiration for how we needed to work together today. Well, the values that we really stood for, of course, were courage, cooperation, and persistence. And you don't have to look at any major change in this country, in this world, whether it be LGBTQ rights, whether it be diversity, whether it be what Martin Luther King did. It took courage, it took perseverance, it took collaboration. These wins are not easy.
Speaking of those values that the Freedom Center started with, how do you think those have developed since then?
We've come a long way since then. It's not been an altogether easy road, but the manifestation of why that was a sound thing to do has been repeated again and again. In the words of school children who've come through and seen a piece of history they otherwise would not see, to be inspired by the qualities of courage and perseverance and collaboration that people needed in order to achieve freedom. These are all values that you come to today in 2021. We need every bit as much as we did then.
Using the values of education and community engagement are what Senior Director Christopher Miller anticipates will bridge the gap. What's the hope moving forward that these conversations can bring to action?
The hope is that people will start to expand and broaden their perspectives, willing to step out of their comfort zone, willing to step out of their own perspective to really take on that there are several narratives that are built into the American narrative. There are several stories. And once you have that understanding, that creates emotional intelligence, but it also creates a better opportunity for you to have empathy for other communities that might be struggling with the social issues. It starts with reconditioning ourselves. We believe it's our story and their story, right? And that has been done because of systems that were put in place because of different standards that we had to live by. But understanding that this American narrative includes Black history. Black history is a part of the American narrative, and it's a very, very important way for us to have an understanding of how we have navigated to where we are today and how to address the struggles we have today.
John Pepper and Christopher Miller said there are areas of progress. They believe the new mission statement and programming play critical roles in moving the Freedom Center forward. Just ahead.
John Lewis didn't want to escape the place. He wanted the place to escape its own demons, its own injustices, its own failures.
Paying tribute to the late Congressman and Freedom Conductor Award recipient John Lewis when Let's Talk Cincy continues.
Bryan Stevenson embodies justice and mercy. And one of the things that he led was the creation of the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice.
Bryan Stevenson, founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, and the late Congressman John Lewis are two of the 4 honorees for this year's International Freedom Conductor Awards. It is the highest honor given to those individuals who reflect the values of the Underground Railroad conductors while inspiring others to do the same.
This space that I occupy, that was occupied by so many who gave their lives to advance the cause of justice, reminds me and teaches me that we have to be conductors for justice, that we have no choice to be silent in the face of so many threats to democracy and fairness. I'm inspired because I know that when we believe the things that we have not seen, we can achieve greatness, we can achieve justice. I am persuaded that in this moment, even though things are difficult, we will prevail. Those who came before me knew to sing the song, "We Shall Overcome," not because they had some false confidence, but they know that truth crushed earth shall rise again. We all have to continue to be conductors. We must all continue to fight for the equality and justice that we all deserve.
The reality is that there was no difference between the John Lewis everyone saw in public and the John Lewis his friends knew in small moments or in private conversations. He was exactly who he seemed to be. And that's because his life was always about more than just him. It was about a noble cause and a righteous crusade, about whether America would make good on the promise of its founding and become a country in which every person from every station, every background, and every community would be afforded the dignity that all people deserve. Now, that promise is what brought John to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial as the youngest leader of the March on Washington. It's what drove him to cross a bridge in Alabama that was named for a grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan and kept him going through threats and through violence. It's what led him to stand alongside President Lyndon Johnson at the signing of a Voting Rights Act that he helped usher into law. It's the commitment that animated him at every moment of his service in Congress and every day of his life.
Both Bryan Stevenson and John Lewis defended human rights by helping reform the legal system. Up next.
Can we not conclude that as long as we can find conductors such as these that we have honored here tonight, the worldwide Underground Railroad lives, and it lives forever.
Freedom conductors for human rights around the world. George and Amal Clooney when Let's Talk Cincy returns.
We are advocates of equity, a convener of dialogue, and a beacon of freedom for the world.
In 2020, Woodrow Keon was named president of the Freedom Center. His main focus showing that the Freedom Center is not only a repository of history, but also an advocate for present-day equality. He sat down with our Lacey Roberts.
Meeting the moment. What does that mean?
It means standing up at this time, to meet the situation at hand and to try to pave a way for a better future. The Underground Railroad has been a social justice movement. It just isn't talked about in that context. So what we thought we needed to do was to clarify what we're really about in terms of being social justice oriented. So we basically decided to make that a more permanent part prominent part of our mission statement so that people would know more clearly what we're about. Dr. Melvin Gravely released a book, and he said what you have to do is acknowledge, and acknowledge is the education piece, but then it's decide, and the decide is basically making a choice, a commitment to do something different going forward. And so we wanted to really try to do some things to make people decide to take action, get off the fence, and decide what they could do personally.
Woodrow Keon says the Freedom Center has been able to prove that with the right message, mission statements can change. Beverly Grant, co-chair of the Freedom Center, discusses the focus moving forward.
It's to educate, inspire, and advocate. And so what we really want to focus on is providing education for people, inspire them to have courageous conversations. And I call them courageous conversations because sometimes when we step into things, we've lost the art of having a good discussion to agree or disagree and move on. And so we want the conversations to be courageous. And then we want people to move on to advocacy. We really want to have freedom for everyone.
People feel like, okay, you're just moving words around. But how do you show that action?
Oh, absolutely. It was not even about adding new words to the page or moving words around. It was a total restructure, if you will, because this moment, this time is so critically important. And this is what the Freedom Center does. This has been our history since we opened our doors. I think the education of the past is still critically important because it lays the foundation for understanding where we currently are and what the future could be. But clearly, we cannot only tell one story or two stories or three stories. We have to tell multiple stories so that we engage everyone. And we're an institution of action. That's why we chose the words that we did. We want to educate because you can't move to action if you're not educated. And if you feel good about the education you've received, advocacy is a natural next step.
Well, the other recipients of the Freedom Center's International Conductor Award were Amal and George Clooney. As you know, George is the son of legendary broadcaster Nick Clooney, who worked alongside Ruth Lyons right here at WLWT. Amal and George Clooney were recognized for their global humanitarian and human rights work. Here's just a portion of their acceptance speech.
I often think about all the things that I would never have been able to do if my family had not escaped a civil war in Lebanon and found safety in England. The lifeline that I got as a refugee. I think of the women who fought just a few generations ago for the rights that I can take for granted today, to vote, to study law, to be a working mother. We all stand on the shoulders of people who decided to fight for our freedom. Individuals who were not going to wait for some other person in some other place to care. We are the beneficiaries of other people's bravery and kindness. Racial injustice is still a reality, and so is slavery. For the last 5 years, I have represented women who were enslaved by ISIS in Iraq and Syria, Yazidi women who were targeted for their faith, kidnapped, raped, and sold, sometimes for the price of a packet of cigarettes. Still, I am optimistic because I believe that there are individual people in each generation who will bend the arc towards justice.
Equal Justice Initiative is a place that we have been supporting for a long time, and we're huge fans. They're on the side of the angels, and they're doing amazing work.
I believe that we can all make a difference if we stand up for those who are not free.
Good trouble in our family when we were growing up was called pick good fights, right? It was always pick good fights. And you tried to do that. And I remember Pop and I, at one point in 2005, we decided we're going to go to Darfur to try and shed a light on this genocide because no one was covering it. And we came back, and eventually we were protesting with, it was literally 35 other people we were arrested, congressmen and senators and Martin Luther King III and Dick Gregory, and we're all stuck into a jail cell. We kept working at it. We had meetings with presidents and testified in front of Congress, and we did fundraisers and rallies, and the crisis raged on. Because for the most part, we failed in our efforts. You have to make peace with failure. A lot of people try to think, a lot of us think as failure as the end, but it's not. Failure is the essential element in that long arc of justice, long arc of history bending towards justice. You can't do it without it. You fail and you fail and you fail until you don't. And then one day, you wake up and those murderers in Darfur are arrested, and your wife is part of the team that's going to bring them to justice, and then you win. So every once in a while, the good guys win, every once in a while. And in our family, there was only one golden rule, only one, and that is to challenge the people who have the power and defend the people who don't. And that's it. That's all. If you do that, you've won.
I was struck by one thing Amal said when she thanked her in-laws, Nick and Nina Clooney. She thanked them for what they gave their son. She said, quote, "Because of you, he learned to stick up for those who are more vulnerable and to never be silent when he saw injustice. And I know that because of George, our children will be the same." Well, you know, the list of past recipients of the Freedom Conductor Award include past presidents and civil rights leaders, including Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth from right here in Cincinnati. You know, Reverend Shuttlesworth led the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and founded Greater New Light Baptist Church here in Cincinnati back in 1966. Up next, the call to action, how you can become the conductor. Let's talk Cincy. We'll be right back.
I ask you to think, how can I make a difference? How can I personally make a difference? How can I be the conductor? You know, none of us need to walk this path to freedom alone. It will take each of us to rise to meet this challenge. The question for you is, will you join us?
And you know, that is the key question the Freedom Center is waiting for you to answer. Civil rights icon Rosa Parks, as you know, was a past recipient of the International Freedom Conductor Award. She said, "One person can change the world." Our Lacey Roberts rejoins us with more on the center's call to action.
That relationship that the Freedom Center wants to have with the community and those younger people, how do you feel that they're showing that they're open to that relationship?
I think just being here, first of all, is showing that they're open to that relationship. You know, you go to a lot of places, you might go to, you know, another town or another city where you don't see anyone who looks like you, or you don't see anything that indicates, you know, a sign of history. So when we see that we have this living landmark here, that really allows us to feel, you know, included and feel spoken for. I think the term representation, you know, it's kind of like a buzzword now, but it's necessary. It is true that representation is needed. And when you think about representation, oftentimes I think we think, you know, race or age, but really it's a cultural, you know, difference and a cultural recognition. So, you know, when you have black people or white people, this is not just, oh, race, this is people from different cultures. So when we acknowledge those differences and people feel spoken for, they feel seen, that really changes, you know, the dynamics of everyone's relationship and how they see the society, and allow them to understand there were people before you who were unheard, and they found a way to make their voices, you know, be loud.
I can't breathe.
And you can't really look at a, you know, social justice movement like, you know, Me Too or Black Lives Matter without looking to the past at, you know, the civil rights, the abolitionist movement. So those things really inspired what we do today, and I don't think that we'd really be able to advocate for social justice the way that we do now without those movements. I think to be a leader isn't necessarily always extreme as we think. You know, we don't have to be the person in front of the march, or we don't have to be the person who sacrifices their career, but you can stand up when you hear something wrong. Those people who were conductors were really just neighbors, partners, friends, family who were making sure that everyone around them lived the free life that they deserved, and that if they were in an environment where they weren't free, they were going to help them to get to a better place. The people who are acting now, the people that we see marching, the people we see protesting, writing books, you know, sacrificing their livelihood, their careers, those are the same people who would have sacrificed those things, 150 years ago. And if we hadn't known, those leaders, we might not exactly know where to go, but we have those, examples of conductors. We have those examples of allyship. So if we look to that, we won't have to be confused. The blueprint's already there for us.
We want to leave you now with one final thought. You can make a difference. You just have to take the first step.
The conductor gets the signal. A spark alights. Passengers follow the flame. Hand on hand, a quick word, a deadly fright. The river runs, feet take flight. A hidden spirit ignites. Black skin, souls bright, carry the flame. Through small towns, big cities, highways, subways, hidden spaces in between. No easy job, the conductor says. Freedom doesn't come free. It takes courage, cooperation, perseverance, the simple grace of we who carry the flame. A man at the gas station nods. You're safe. A teenage boy in the siren's glare. Hands up, don't shoot. They all carry the flame. The conductor is no savior, not on a t-shirt, a billboard, a front page, but still she carries the flame. It's a long way to the Big Dipper, the old drinking gourd, the promised land, to the place just over the river where hope shines. For all who are oppressed, the journey to freedom must continue. It's up to you. Will you sit back, look away, hands at your side, or will you stand up, get engaged, get involved, be the conductor, carry the light?
Watching that, I was thinking about something that Marion Wright Edelman said. She said, Lord, I cannot preach like Martin Luther King Jr., or turn a poetic phrase like Maya Angelou, but I care, and I'm willing to serve. I don't have Fred Shuttlesworth's or Harriet Tubman's courage or Franklin Roosevelt's political skills, but I care, and I'm willing to serve. I cannot sing like Fannie Lou Hamer or organize like Ella Baker, but I care, and I'm willing to serve. And so that's really what it comes down to. Do you care, and are you willing to serve? And that's what today's Freedom Conductors, that's what it's all about. Well, that does it for this edition of Let's Talk Cincy. I'm Curtis Fuller. Have a nice day.